Few people knew it, but Edgar Cayce recorded on several occasions that certain souls, days or even hours before departing, show clear signs of saying goodbye. He described a kind of expanded awareness in the spirit that is about to free itself from the body, as though something sacred were happening within, allowing the soul to see beyond time and beyond matter. And even without fully understanding, the body reacts. A gaze that lingers longer than usual, a sentence spoken out of context, a prolonged embrace. Cayce said that these moments were not coincidences, they were veiled farewells, signs that the soul already knew its mission was coming to an end. Science still tries to understand these phenomena as emotional lapses, but Cayce saw in them a spiritual portal opening at the very moment when the veil between the two worlds begins to dissolve. In one of his most enigmatic readings, Cayce recounted the case of a woman who, a few days before she died, began revisiting places from her childhood and delivering letters to people she had not seen in years. She was not ill and suspected no danger, yet she acted like someone who needed to bring old chapters to a close. According to Cayce, that soul had already received, on a subconscious level, the call from the other plane. And the spiritual mind itself, even without directly interfering with reason, began preparing the body and emotions for departure. Many of us have already witnessed something similar, but we rarely recognize it. So, if these stories have already touched your life, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This space was created to share what logic cannot explain but the heart understands. And Cayce was a master at translating those mysteries with a clarity that transcends time. Cayce affirmed that there is a wisdom in the soul that surpasses any diagnosis. In certain cases, even before the body shows signs, the spirit already senses that it is completing its journey. It begins to loosen itself subtly from matter, as though rehearsing its farewell. This appears in vivid dreams, sudden changes in behavior, or words that carry a sense of finality, young children saying things such as, "Can I go now?" Elderly people asking to see the sunrise one last time, or apparently healthy individuals spontaneously giving away their belongings. Most of us ignore these signs. We regard them as coincidences, emotional fragility, or even eccentricity. But Cayce saw in those moments an alignment between the spirit and the higher plane, as though a new chapter were silently opening. In his visions, he explained that the spiritual body begins to move away before physical death. This does not mean absence, but transition, as though the soul were already being prepared by spiritual guides to cross the threshold. Cayce said that many of those who are about to depart begin to see deceased loved ones, hear gentle voices in their sleep, or feel a loving presence around them. Science calls this hallucination or intense brain activity, but according to Cayce, it is an advanced spiritual reception. It is as though the other side were reaching out its hands even before the crossing, a welcoming gesture so that the soul will not be afraid and will know that it is being awaited with love. And when we recognize this, we begin to perceive these final gestures not as endings, but as signs of a return to our origin. Many relatives report that shortly before death, their loved ones changed their tone of voice, appeared calmer, or spoke symbolically, as though they were in two worlds at the same time. Cayce saw this as the soul already communicating with subtler planes, as though it were trying to translate, through the limited words of earth, what it could already see clearly on the spiritual plane. Some people ask for forgiveness for no apparent reason, others express gratitude for things they had never mentioned before. A final adjustment is taking place, a harmonization of soul, body, and purpose. And although this may seem confusing to us, to the soul it is crystal clear. It is freeing itself. It is closing a cycle with the quiet dignity of one who understands that love is the only legacy that remains. Cayce advised us not to interrupt these manifestations and not to try to correct or rationalize the gestures of someone who is about to depart, because at that moment the spirit is more lucid than ever. The person may seem distant, yet is closer to the eternal self than ever before. Ignoring these signs is like turning your back on a sunset that occurs only once in a lifetime. Cayce invites us to observe with the heart and listen with the soul, because these silent farewells contain more truth than 1,000 words spoken amid the turmoil of daily life. They are messages that touch dimensions where time does not exist, where everything is memory, reunion, and light. And when we are able to perceive this, something within us awakens as well. In the readings in which he addressed the final moments of life, Cayce spoke about the loosening of earthly bonds. For him, this process was not abrupt, but a delicate dance between the visible and the invisible. In some cases, the soul began visiting the spiritual plane during dreams as a conscious preparation for what was to come. According to him, this would explain why certain people report recurring dreams of deceased relatives or of unfamiliar yet peaceful landscapes. Cayce said that these dreams were not mere constructions of the mind, but rehearsals by the soul for its return to its true home. And when we understand this, death no longer seems like a violent end. It comes to be seen as a guided crossing, a carefully planned return home in which every gesture, however strange it may appear, carries profound meaning. One case cited by Cayce involved a man who, 3 days before a fatal accident, began saying goodbye to friends without explaining why. He made phone calls, sent messages, and said that he was at peace with everything. When he departed suddenly, many were shocked. But those who had paid attention to the signs realized that something within him already knew. According to Cayce, the soul can glimpse the future when doing so is part of the karmic plan, not to create fear, but to encourage acceptance. Free will still exists, but certain experiences are already attuned to the lessons the soul came to seek. That is why some depart without warning, while others subtly announce their imminent departure. The spirit speaks when matter falls silent, and Cayce taught us how to hear that language. For many, accepting that the soul knows when it is going to depart is a challenge. We live in a culture that denies death, avoids silence, and fears the unknown. But Cayce invited us to do the opposite. He asked us to see death as a natural and necessary chapter, not as punishment, but as liberation. In his words, the soul does not die, it merely changes its dwelling place. And whoever understands this truth begins to pay attention to the signs. The sudden withdrawal of someone who had always been very present, a final gaze filled with tenderness, an inexplicable peace before the farewell. All of these are ways of saying, I am going, but I am not truly leaving. I am returning to the place from which I came. And perhaps, if you close your eyes and quiet your heart, you will be able to feel my presence even after the final breath. In his deepest observations, Cayce addressed the phenomenon of the spirit's preparation. He said that before physical death, the spiritual body begins to detach in layers. This can cause sensations of lightness, memory lapses, or a strange calm that does not always correspond to the seriousness of the situation. Some people begin speaking with beings who have already died or say that they see lights no one else can see. Medicine does not always understand these signs and sometimes tries to medicate them. But Cayce warned that they are genuine manifestations of contact with higher planes. The soul is being instructed, comforted, and guided. There is no suffering in this process, only a gentle surrender. And when we are able to accompany this movement with love and respect, we become bridges between the two worlds. These signs, so subtle and at the same time so powerful, are often ignored out of fear. Cayce understood that human beings have difficulty dealing with impermanence, which is why he insisted on the importance of educating the heart about the cycles of life. Accepting that death is part of the soul's purpose also means accepting that we are not alone and that an invisible order is caring for everything. And when the soul begins to say goodbye, it does so with a wisdom that transcends every rational explanation. It may be a tenderly written note, an unexpected visit, or even a silence filled with meaning. Every gesture is a spiritual whisper saying, time here is running out, but love continues, and whoever hears those whispers never forgets. Cayce also mentioned that many of these farewells occur not to comfort the living, but to fulfill spiritual promises made before incarnation. In his understanding, some souls undertake the commitment to leave peace around them before they depart. On some level, they know they need to bring their bonds to a dignified close, and so they seek reconciliation, unspoken words, and gestures that were left unfinished. It is as though, as the soul approaches the end, it receives a map of what it still needs to resolve. And even without understanding why, the person begins to act under the influence of an inner force that cannot be ignored. When Cayce spoke about this, he did so with profound respect. To him, it was not madness, it was wisdom. It was the Spirit guiding the final steps with divine precision. One of the most moving passages in Cayce's readings describes a child who, at the age of 5, began saying that he would not live long. He said naturally that he would return to the home from which he had come. No one took him seriously. They thought it was merely a child's imagination. But months later, he became unexpectedly ill and departed peacefully. Cayce used this example to illustrate how some souls reincarnate with partial awareness of their time here. They do not feel fear, they feel a mission, and when that mission has been fulfilled, they prepare to return. Even as children, these souls leave profound marks on those who remain behind. Their gazes, their words, their intense presence. Everything suggests that they knew and that they were not bound by the logic of matter. And Cayce said that in such cases, the farewell is not tragic, it is sacred. It is a reminder that a greater plan is unfolding even when everything seems incomprehensible. According to Cayce, what we call a premonition is often a spiritual perception that surpasses the ordinary senses. When someone says they felt that something was going to happen, they are not necessarily imagining it. It may be the soul manifesting itself. This explains why so many people report feeling pressure in the chest, sudden sadness, or an uncontrollable urge to see someone shortly before a loss. Cayce saw in this a form of subtle communication between connected souls, as though one were warning the other that its physical presence would soon cease, not to cause pain, but to allow a farewell, even a silent one. That is why he encouraged us not to ignore those impulses. When the heart calls, it is the soul speaking. And when we learn to listen to it, we avoid regrets that can echo throughout an entire lifetime. In his readings, Cayce emphasized that death is not an isolated event. It is preceded by signs, gestures, and energies that often go unnoticed. He compared the process to the first light before dawn. Light already begins to touch the horizon even before we see the sun rise. The same is true of the soul. It begins to radiate a different glow. The eyes gain depth. Speech becomes more reflective. Movements grow slower, as though one's inner sense of time were changing rhythm. It is a spiritual cadence that can be perceived only by those who slow down enough to observe. And Cayce said that those who learn to recognize this cadence live with greater sensitivity. They know when to hold someone more tightly, when to listen more attentively, and when to say what has never been said, because they understand that every soul carries its sacred hour of departure. Cayce also spoke about farewell dreams. According to him, it is common for souls that are about to depart to appear in the dreams of loved ones before leaving the body, not as ghosts, but as living, smiling presences that convey peace. Cayce believed this happened because time is different on the spiritual planes. The soul has already begun to move beyond the timeline of earthly life, and this allows it to send signs to those it loves, preparing them emotionally. People report dreaming of farewells, kisses, embraces, or memorable phrases, only to discover days later that the person had departed that very night. Cayce saw these dreams as a gift, a spiritual offering that contains healing even when wrapped in pain. And when we value these experiences, we stop treating death as a loss and begin to see it as a reunion postponed. In the messages Cayce left behind, there was a constant appeal to loving awareness. He did not see signs of farewell as tragedies, but as lessons in a higher form of love. In his accounts, he said that every soul teaches something profound as it says goodbye. It shows that time is limited, that affection needs to be expressed, and that forgiveness cannot be postponed. Therefore, when someone begins to say goodbye, even without knowing it, we should receive that gesture with presence, not with despair, but with gratitude, because that soul is carrying out a final act of wisdom. And when we are able to participate in it with an open heart, we too are healed. Cayce said that death does not wound the one who loves, it merely transforms. And when we look through the eyes of the soul, we understand that nothing, absolutely nothing, is in vain. Some accounts received by Cayce spoke of people who, days before death, stared fixedly toward the sky, even while indoors. It was as though they were seeing something beyond, something ordinary eyes could not reach. Cayce said that in those moments the soul is already envisioning its new reality. It may be the spiritual realm, loved ones, or even symbolic images announcing the transition. It is a spiritual phenomenon, not a psychological one. He insisted that these visions were not illusions, they were revelations, what he called the first images of the return. And when we witness someone in that state, we must remember that we are standing before a miracle an instant in which heaven touches earth and a soul prepares to cross the threshold with the dignity of one who has completed the journey, without cries, without noise, only with light. Cayce taught that when someone begins acting differently shortly before departing, it is not merely a change in mood or routine, it is the soul signaling that it is aligning with its origin. In his readings, he mentioned people who stopped arguing, sought reconciliation, or suddenly no longer seemed to care about trivial things. According to him, this reflected a silent spiritual awakening. As the soul felt itself drawing closer to the higher plane, it began leaving behind the burdens of the physical world. It was as though a new vision had taken control, calmer and broader. Those who are attentive perceive it, they feel the change in the air, in the gaze, and in the rhythm. And Cayce said that recognizing this is a gift, a call to value the final moments not with sadness, but with reverence. There are also those who say goodbye through art, written words, or music. Cayce said that the soul finds unique ways to say farewell. Some write letters without explanation, others compose songs, paint pictures, or make videos that only acquire meaning after their departure. These are manifestations of the spirit seeking to make its presence eternal through creation. Cayce believed that in such cases the creative act was not accidental, it was sacred. It was the soul's way of leaving a piece of itself in the world like a beacon for those who would remain. When we hear a melody left by someone who has departed or read a letter filled with symbolism, we are in fact touching that person's spirit. And for Cayce, this was one of the most beautiful proofs that the soul is eternal and that it continues to communicate even after the final breath. Cayce also pointed out that animals perceive these farewells before humans do. He said that because they are more closely connected to spiritual instinct, dogs and cats often behave differently around someone who is about to depart. They stay closer and become more attentive. Sometimes they do not leave the person's side for even a second. There are cases of animals howling at night or lying on the person's chest without anyone understanding why. To Cayce, this was not merely behavior, it was energetic perception. Animals, with the purity of their souls, are able to sense the vibrational change taking place in a soul that is about to be released. They do not fear death, they feel it as part of the cycle and offer their presence as comfort, as though saying, "I know what is happening. I am with you. Do not be afraid." Another touching aspect of Cayce's revelations is that not every farewell is conscious. Some souls do not know they are going to depart, yet their essence still begins to send out signs. It is common to see people become more introspective, speak nostalgically about the past, or suddenly show a desire to resolve old matters. Cayce said that as the spirit aligns with greater purposes, it moves the human being to act even without rational understanding. And this is an act of love. The soul wants to leave in peace. That is why it moves the person to seek reconciliation, visit meaningful places, and say words that had been trapped in the throat for decades. It is not by chance, it is spiritual wisdom manifesting itself. And when we allow this to happen with acceptance, we create space for the departure to be gentle, so that the soul can leave knowing it fulfilled what it needed to fulfill. Many people, upon hearing these stories, ask how they can know whether a farewell is taking place. Cayce answered that the secret lies not in observing with the eyes, but with the heart. When someone close to us begins acting differently, speaking with greater depth, or even smiling serenely for no apparent reason, it is time to be present. It is not about becoming alarmed, but about loving more intensely, listening more patiently, and looking into their eyes more attentively. Cayce said that in those moments it is as though the soul were saying, "Treasure my presence, for soon I will be somewhere else." This is not something sad, but a subtle reminder that time is precious. And if we receive it with courage, we can transform the end into a moment of profound connection. Cayce spoke about the importance of not interrupting spiritual processes with denial or despair. He said that the pain of those who remain often prevents the spirit of the one who is departing from continuing in peace. When there is excessive attachment, shouting, or despair, an energetic bond is created that makes the transition more difficult. That is why he asked for serenity and love, yes, and sadness too, but with understanding and respect for the natural cycle of life. The departing soul needs to feel that it is free to go, that it left love behind, and that it fulfilled its part. And those of us who remain need to become guardians of that peace. Cayce reminds us that every farewell is also a new beginning, that on the other side the soul continues its journey, and that when we accept this, we become more human, wiser, and more spiritual, because we finally understand that death does not separate, it only transforms. In Cayce's words, the moment of death is merely a doorway, and before crossing it, the soul often leaves visible signs for those who know how to look. He stated that silent farewells take place every day, but most of us have not been taught to recognize them. This is not about predicting the future or foretelling tragedies. It is about refining our spiritual sensitivity. When someone embraces more tightly, looks at us for longer, or writes messages filled with emotion, that person is conveying more than words. They are offering presence. Cayce said that this is the greatest gift we can receive before someone departs: authentic, intense, spiritual presence. And if we pay attention, we will realize that those moments are like seeds planted in the soul that blossom long after the departure. Cayce explained that in many cases, signs of farewell are not directed toward everyone, but only toward those with whom the soul shares the deepest bonds. That is why a child sometimes senses that something is wrong before receiving any news, or a mother awakens in the middle of the night with her child's name on her lips without knowing why. These connections are spiritual and do not follow the rules of time or distance. The soul communicates its transition to whoever can understand or offer energetic support. Cayce said that these connections span incarnations and that when a spirit senses it is going to depart, it searches within the hearts most closely connected to it for a way to say goodbye, even if only in silence, even if only through an inexplicable feeling that makes us stop and listen to the invisible. In Cayce's deepest visions, he revealed that as the soul prepares to depart, it begins reconnecting with its original purpose. It is as though, before crossing the threshold, it receives a spiritual mirror. In it, the soul sees what it has learned, what it left undone, and what it may still transform through one final gesture. That is why many people seek reconciliation with former adversaries or leave messages for those with whom they have lost contact. It is not merely regret, it is spiritual awareness. Cayce explained that this moment of lucidity is offered as a final opportunity for healing. The soul has the chance to leave lighter and more whole, and those nearby are also called into that healing process. When this opportunity is welcomed, everyone involved emerges transformed, because what appeared to be an ending becomes a seed. Cayce also described what he called the memory of origin, a subtle state in which the soul, as it approaches release from the body, begins to remember who it truly is. This can manifest through enigmatic words, memories of other lives, or the feeling of having experienced something similar before. Some people speak of landscapes they have never seen or describe feelings that cannot be explained within their present life. For Cayce, these moments are flashes of the spirit freeing itself from the limitations of the flesh. The soul remembers its eternity, and when this happens there is no fear, there is recognition and a profound sense of return. And even if those around the person do not understand what is being said, the soul knows. It prepares itself with dignity, wrapped in a wisdom that cannot be taught, only felt. Throughout his decades of service, Cayce insisted that we should speak more about death, not as a taboo, but as part of life. He said that silence in the face of death makes us blind to the signs it offers, and that instead of avoiding it, we should prepare ourselves to welcome it, not with fear but with respect. Every soul has its own time, its own rhythm, and its own way of saying goodbye, and the more awakened we are, the more we will perceive the hidden beauty in those moments. Cayce called this spiritual literacy, the ability to read the invisible, hear what is not spoken, and feel what cannot be touched. It is a form of learning that transforms farewells into rituals of light, pain into revelation, and loss into eternal presence. Cayce left us a reflection that resonates like a whisper from the soul: learn to love in such a way that even after departure, love remains. For him, that was the true meaning of farewells that begin before death. They are not warnings of death, but reminders of life. The soul that says goodbye before departing is telling us that our time here is brief and that what truly matters is what we leave in people's hearts. Therefore, when you perceive the signs, do not run away, embrace. When you feel the call, do not hesitate, trust. And when the farewell arrives, look into the person's eyes and say everything that needs to be said, because perhaps that instant is eternity opening before you. And when it has passed, What will remain is the love you had the courage to give. With every reading Cayce gave about the soul and its passage, one certainty became clearer: the spirit never departs without leaving traces. Although the body ceases, the vibration of presence, the echo of consciousness, and the memory of affection remain among us. He said that as the spirit rises, it leaves energetic impressions in the places where it lived, in the people it loved, and even in the objects it touched. These marks are not ghosts, but traces of light. They are subtle parts of a consciousness that has expanded but still wishes to convey peace, teach through its departure, and whisper, even from the other side, that it remains present. That is why, when someone departs and we feel their presence in an inexplicable way, Cayce taught us that it is real. The soul continues to communicate, even though it now uses a language made of silence, memory, and love. And if there is one central teaching in Cayce's visions about the soul's farewells, it is this: nothing happens by chance, not the smallest gesture, not the faintest sigh. If a soul begins to draw away before death, it is because there is something to be understood, something to be touched with tenderness. For him, the signs are not meant to create fear, but to awaken compassion, connection, and presence. The soul that is saying goodbye wants to be seen in its wholeness, not merely as a body, but as light that is about to return to the source. And those who recognize this have the opportunity to experience a silent miracle, accompanying someone's transition with full awareness that they are witnessing something sacred. It is an instant in which time slows down and the invisible becomes more real than everything around it. Many people ignore these signs because they do not know how to react. Cayce recommended something simple and profound: just be there. Do not try to control. Do not try to understand everything. Simply remain present with the soul and with an open heart. For the one who is departing, this is more valuable than any words. It is a spiritual gift. Being fully present with someone who is saying goodbye is one of the purest forms of love, and it is also an act of healing. Healing for the one who is departing, who feels welcomed, and healing for the one who remains, who will know that they gave everything they could give. Cayce believed that angels are present in those moments, not with visible wings, but through the vibration of peace, surrender, and unconditional love, and that whoever opens themselves to such an instant never emerges from it in the same way, because they have touched something eternal. Perhaps, on hearing all of this, you have remembered someone, a gaze that lasted longer than usual, a phrase that makes sense today, an absence that still pulses in your chest. Cayce said that when the soul awakens, it also invites us to awaken, to remember that we are here only briefly, that farewells are part of the path, but that true love never ends. It transforms, expands, and becomes eternal, and whenever we feel longing, it is not absence, it is a presence that continues to vibrate on another plane. Longing is a bridge, a living connection with those we love. And Cayce encouraged us to cross that bridge with courage, not to fear what we feel, because within the deepest feeling is the soul asking to continue loving. Today, perhaps more than ever, we need to learn to listen to the signs, to perceive when someone is saying goodbye even while smiling, and to accept that the end of a life is not the end of love, but its expansion. Edgar Cayce did not come to teach us about death, but about the eternity of the soul, the continuity of being, and the loving mystery that connects us beyond time and flesh. If you have come this far, it is because something within you also feels that this is true, that there is more, that we are more, and that every story and every goodbye is part of a plan that reaches far beyond understanding. And perhaps that is the most beautiful thing of all, living with the knowledge that every moment is sacred. If this message touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel to continue receiving the truths Cayce left us, because what he revealed was not meant merely to be read, but to be lived and passed on like a thread of light between awakening souls.